baby, what is up, YouTube? It's your boy Milty, back with a hometown commander, and we're back for another episode of Milty Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us on my quest to outbrew the Magic world. We are rounding up week 2 of my 2023 roundup, going through old decks and new, updating them, brewing, and just having a good time celebrating the end of the year as we move forward. As you see this video, there's going to be one more week of the roundup, and then starting on the 15th, we're going to be covering Ravnica Remaster, which I'm excited about. But today, we're covering a deck that I truly loved the first time I put it together. The only problem I had with it was that it just required a little bit too much tracking of counters and things, which can be a lot for some people. So if you're the kind of person who doesn't like dice and counters and tokens, and this is not the deck for you, but if you ever wanted to mix an Aristocrat deck with a Superfriends deck, this is it. And we're talking about Kethis, the Hidden Hand, a 3-mana 3/4 Elf Advisor that says legendary spells we cast cost 1 less to cast. We can exile 2 legendary cards from our graveyard to give each legendary card in our graveyard the ability for us to play it from our graveyard. So Kathus really has one purpose in our deck, which is to make our legendaries cheaper. Now, every planeswalker, whether it's written on the planeswalker or not, because actually some old planeswalkers, like this Sorin, for example, do not say legendary, whereas they are legendary. Every planeswalker is legendary. All of them are legendary, going to cost us 1 less, and almost every creature in our deck is legendary as well. So Kethis is going to try to reduce everything for us. The second half of Kethis is pretty cool because if we have a ton of things in our graveyard, we just pitch 2 of them, we exile 2 of them, and then we can play things back out of our graveyard. But I call this deck Aristocrats because it's basically what it is. Where it's an Aristocrats deck and a Superfriends deck. We're gonna smash them together. So I want to take both the parts at once and talk about them separately because I think it's going to be the easiest way for us to understand the deck. And I think we'll start to understand the win con on the Aristocrat side. The Aristocrat side is how we're going to end the game. But I want to talk about the Superfriends first, and then we'll kind of get there. Almost every single Planeswalker we have in this deck is either going to make tokens or sacrifice tokens or do something that benefits other Planeswalkers. So what do I mean by that? Things like Elspeth, Sun's Champion, make tokens. Make 3/1/1 tokens. Lolth makes 2 spiders. Liliana's kind of the perfect of these because it makes a token, but it also says whenever a creature we control dies, we draw a card, which could be a draw control engine. One of my favorite planeswalkers in the deck is Kaya Geist Hunter for its second ability. -2 until end of turn. If 1 or more tokens will be made under your control, twice that many are created instead. Now, so like I said, the role of most of our planeswalkers is going to be making tokens. Nissa with her -7 can help us end the game by buffering our board for the amount of force we have, if that's a route we want to go. I like Sorin, Sullen Visitor. It's +1, can give all of our creatures +1/+1 lifelink, so we could take attacks and influence our opponents that way. Vraska's -9 says whatever creature you control does combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. So that could potentially run us into a scenario we go so wide that our tokens are able to just knock people out that way. But again, every planeswalker in our deck is going to try to make a token or remove something or affect the board in some way, with the exception of a Johnny, who's here to give all of our creatures vigilance and then be able to put counters on everything and loyalty counters and other planeswalkers. Now, pairing with those planeswalkers, we have 2 main types of creatures in our deck. The first is our doublers, Mondrak, Ohertak, just straight up doubling the amount of tokens we make. Mondrak will double everything. Ohertak will triple only creature tokens, but that's okay because that's what we want. We're playing things like Peregrine Took to make extra foods every time we make tokens, and we could stack those foods to draw. Just gives us another draw engine. But we're also playing things like Vorinclex and Lae'zel to affect the amount of counters that are being put on things. Vorinclex is going to double them and have them for our opponents. Lae'zel is just going to add 1. But this is going to allow us, our planeswalkers, to, if they have an important ultimate, get there quickly, or just come in with more counters and be able to do their effects. We are playing Chatterfang as a little bit of fun. Chatterfang's going to give us, anytime we make a token, we make that many tokens plus that many 1/1 squirrels. And this, of course, is a combo commander in its own right. Chatterfang is great because we can turn those squirrels into removal if need be. We have things like Karth the Lion, which allow all of our planeswalkers to cost less in that every ability is +1, so it could turn a 0 into a +1 or a -1 into a 0, depending on what they are. But those are kind of the creatures we have that really care about the planeswalkers, or the things that with the planeswalkers trying to make tokens, what they're trying to do. We also have the Peregrine Dynamo, a card that works pretty well in this deck, allowing you to copy one of your planeswalkers' abilities that isn't, because none of them are our commander, and that's pretty great because then we can get more of the tokens or get more of these effects from our planeswalkers as they make tokens. Okay, so that's the planeswalker side. Now let's get into the aristocrat side. For anyone who's never played an Aristocrats deck or doesn't understand the name, Aristocrats is a style of gameplay where you sacrifice permanents for value. Traditionally, you're sacrificing tokens, or in fact tokens or creature tokens, and traditionally what you're doing it is for, you're going to sacrifice a token or make a token die to activate effects like Bastion Remembrance, where whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. These are the type of effects that we're going to try to use as much as we can to hurt our opponents every time we sacrifice a token. Now, you're probably thinking, for the newer players out there, why would you sacrifice your own things? Well, we want to sacrifice our own things for value, particularly with things like Phyrexian Altar, where we can sacrifice creatures for mana to get us more mana to play things, more mana to do things. And the cool part about something like Phyrexian Altar, or something like Bartolome, which allows us to sacrifice creatures or artifacts to put counters on him, is that we can do it at instant speed. So if someone tries to board wipe us, we can sacrifice our whole board of tokens to make these triggers go on the stack right then and there, and punish our opponents for trying to interact with us. But we have plenty of these effects. We have something like a Lost Hill Core, and whenever a creature we control dies, each opponent loses a life. Mirkwood Bats, whenever we create or sacrifice a token, each opponent loses a life. Funny enough, Mirkwood Bats is only one of 2 non-legendary creatures in the deck. The other is Pitiless Plunderer, a card that actually combines really well with Chatterfang. Whenever another creature we control dies, we make a treasure, which we can turn into using it for more mana. We have things like Taste of Karlov to double any trigger that would happen because of a permanent we control dying. So that's going to make things like Bastion Remembrance go off twice. And then we have something like Yawgmoth as another sacrifice outlet to affect our opponents. We're not just playing Bastion, though. We're also playing Agent of the Iron Throne. What I really like about Agent of the Iron Throne is it's not just creatures going to the graveyard for our creature tokens, it's also artifacts. So if we're sacrificing those foods, they're going to have each opponent lose a life. And I think Agent of the Iron Throne is a really important card. The only downside to Agent of the Iron Throne, right, is our commander has to be on the battlefield for Agent of the Iron Throne, whereas Bastion Remembrance doesn't care. And there are times in this deck where Kethis may not be on the battlefield, and you may not need him on the battlefield, but the truth is, for something like Agent of the Iron Throne, you need it to be there. The other things that we've kind of built into the deck to try to take advantage of our tokens are things like Cryptolith Rite and Elven Chorus, allowing our tokens to tap for mana instead of needing to sacrifice them. This is beneficial because then, if we're not ready to sacrifice them yet, we can just tap them for mana and continue to build our board. And what we're trying to do most of the time is kind of always have a ton of planeswalkers out, so that if our opponents use a standard board wipe like a Wrath of God that just destroys all creatures, our planeswalkers are still there, and we can use them to continue to build back up. It's actually going to be our planeswalkers that are threats, and not the little tokens that are sitting on the battlefield. We're using things like City of Death and 3 Blind Mice to make more tokens. We have things like Smothering Tithe to make tokens that aren't creatures. One of my favorite cards, as far as a card that sits on both sides of our deck, is Elspeth's Talon. We equip we enchant a planeswalker with it, and it gains +1, create 3 soldiers. But then whenever you activate a loyalty ability of that enchanted planeswalker, creatures you control get +2/+2 in vigilance on the turn. What this ends up doing is creating a scenario where the wider our board is, just activating that planeswalker's abilities could turn into a overrun style effect that could help us make a big attack at our opponents. Of course, we do have things like Skull Clamp to draw 2 cards whenever our creatures die, and that allows us to equip that Skull Clamp to a 1/1, give it +1/-1, draw the 2 cards when it dies, fill our hand. Some of the newest additions to this deck was something like Ratadrabik, which wasn't in the deck originally, and I've put up a Ratadrabik brew on the channel, a commander that I really like in its own right. My only problem is my deck just ended up being way too combo-y. What I like about it in this deck is it's going to allow you to make 2 copies of Mondrak, or 2 copies of O'Hare Talk, or 2 copies of Chatterfang when they die, by sacrificing them to these other effects that we have anyway. And now you're taking advantage of these creatures that we already have. 2 copies of Alasso Core for the double triggers. And I think I like Ratadrabek a bit better in a shell like this than I do by itself. I have always had so much love for this deck. It's probably one of my favorite Abzan decks I've ever built, just because I actually like Planeswalkers and I like tokens a lot. And in the 2 games I played this deck, I always did pretty well with it, because as soon as you build up a board, it certainly gets harder. Now, the time I played this deck was before stuff like Mirkwood Bats exist. Rosy Cotton adds a lot of fun to the deck, and some other cards have come out since then. But I think the deck's only gotten better since the last time I built it, with additions of things like Vraska, Betrayal, Sting, and the Eternal Wanderer for a little bit of a board wipe on it as well. But again, the deck is an Aristocrats deck at the end of the day. We're just using Super Friends and Planeswalkers as a way to deliver ourselves to the finish line. Now, the way we're going to end the game, of course, is those death triggers most of the time. There is still a scenario where we make so many tokens we could just overrun the board. It's not going to happen as often as you think it is, because they're going to be little 1/1s. But again, things like Elspeth's Talon, or that Nissa buff could, or this Sorin lifelink could affect the game more than we think it could at particular times. But I think more often than not, we're going to see these, have our tokens die, draw cards, get into those Bastions and those Agents of the Iron Thrones and the Mirkwood Bats, and just proceed to just wring out our opponents bit by bit and end the game that way. But let's get into the playtest, and hopefully we can get our start quickly. So we have a 2-lander here. Farseek's great for some ramp. We have Luxior, a card that I truly love in this deck, which can turn our Planeswalkers into creatures, which allows them to hit hard if we need to. If we have a Planeswalker that doesn't have a good ultimate but has a ton of loyalty, Sorin can make us some tokens be great. We got Assassin's Trophy, some removal, and Right Oblivion for some removal, so I like it. For turn 1, we draw a Skull Clamp, which is a great thing to have. And we'll take the 1 from the City of Brass there. I think happily to do that. I guess conversely we could put the Swamp down and not take the 1, but either way, get that down. Turn 2, I guess this would have been better to put the right there. It would have been better to put the Swamp down turn 1, so we didn't have to take another damage here. But we're gonna go get our Triome with the Farseek, so now we have access to all 3 of our colors twice. Turn 4, I kind of like the idea of just getting this forest down. Now there's 2 schools of thought here. We could dump Kethis and get the Luxior for free, because it's going to get reduced down to 0. Or we could get Sorin down and start making a token, so we could clamp later, or block with. I think I like the idea of getting Sorin down here and start ticking it up. I know, yes, Kethis reduces everything by 1, and Kethis is important, but again, I want to start getting this process going. The other reason I like Sorin is the +1 can allow us to get an extra card in our hand. Now the token is a minus, right? So we wouldn't want to do it next turn to make another one to get rid of it, but I don't think we mind. Here, the Overgrown Tomb, we probably want to come in 3 for Kethis. The Luxior would be free, and Peregrine would be 2 mana. So I think I would shock in the Tomb here. Get Kethis down, get the Luxior down, get Peregrine Took down. And then I would +1 Sorin, showing a voice, this is a Voice Zendikar, put it in our hand, take the 3. And now next turn we can play the Voice of Zendikar, which is going to, again, get us more tokens, but it also can put counters on all of our creatures. The next turn we draw an Isolated Chapel, which is going to come in untapped because of all our lands. We play that Nissa, get a token from her, get a token from the Sorin. That should make us 2 foods. And we could clamp that plant with the Skull Clamp, which is probably what I would do to draw 2. Now we have a Nature's Lore we could play this turn to go get another land. We saw the Overgrown Tomb, so we should probably go get, I don't know, the next land I can think of that would be important that we can get with this typing would be something like Temple Garden, and that comes in tapped. We can play the Yawgmoth this turn if we want, or we can wait it, and we've got 2 pieces of removal with a few tokens ready to go. We'll do our last turn. We draw Garruk. It's 0, makes 2 wolves, and whenever the wolves die, we put a counter back on Garruk, or it can destroy creatures. Again, this is great because we can do that. And then maybe we play the Yawgmoth. Again, we would make the token with Nissa, make the tokens with Garruk. Maybe we'd +1 for Sorin this turn, lose 5 for the Tefish Zop, but that's okay because we get now another Planeswalker in our hand that can make tokens. And now literally all we are missing is a sacrifice outlet that deals damage to our opponents. We have a couple ways we can do this. Yawgmoth can draw us a card every time we sacrifice a creature to put a counter on a creature or one of our opponent's creatures. This turn we should have enough foods with Peregrine Took to start sacrificing them to draw cards. So as I said, now we're just literally waiting to draw enough cards to hit into a sack outlet or a card that's going to punish our opponents. We have a sack outlet now with the Yawgmoth. We just have to pay a life. But we have a couple things making us counters or tokens, and we have Sorin, which can also help us draw. I realize you don't have to put it in your hands. We could have left the Tavish, the Tavish that on top there and not taken the 5. We just knew we were going to draw them the next turn. But as you can see here, we're basically just going to keep making the tokens with those guys, getting the extra foods, drawing the cards, looking at the top of Sorin, and all we need to do is just work our way into something that's relevant, over the next couple turns. Chatterfang is great because that gives us a nice sack outlet for the squirrels that we're going to inevitably made. Flawless maneuver there to protect our board, and again, we would just be going through those next few turns. Again, the deck takes a lot of setup because we have to get all those pieces right. The biggest problem with most Aristocrats decks is you need a sacrifice outlet, you need something to do damage to your opponents, and you need a way to make enough tokens. There we had 2 of them, 1.5 of them, and we just needed to find the 3rd one, and that's kind of where most of our Aristocrats decks are going. Well, let me know what you think of Kethis Aristofriends down in the comments below. This is a deck that I've always wanted to come back to. Just because I love the style of this deck. I love mixing the Aristocrats, a playstyle that I'm still driving towards a deck for having in my personal deck box, with Superfriends, a deck type that I don't play a ton of, but I've always liked. And a lot of these Planeswalkers right here are the ones specifically I'd want to play anyway. The Abzan Planeswalkers have always been the ones that have interested the most. I like Garrick. I like the Liliana, of course, Red Heart General. I love Sorin and his ability to make vampire tokens. And we have so many other ones here that do it well as well. So this has kind of always been that shell I've always looked at as far as an Aristocrats deck going. Maybe, just maybe, this video will make me want to try this one again. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys next time.